People have opinions without being fully informed.
Trust me, I'm a Canadian here.
I don't care if you're a Christian, Messianic, or Hebrew roots. I want to know if your theology is biblical.
Maybe I'm right. Of course I'm right.
If you're going to cite a source, be responsible. Cite your source.
Your mom goes to college.
Hey, we're just having a conversation. There's only 36 people listening anyway, right?
You can Google it.
Wow, at what point does history matter? At what point does truth matter?
An alien invasion. Is it biblical? Of course it is.
Look, there's a way to do scholarship and a way not to do scholarship. You got to cite your source. Who's your source?
My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows his kid is going with the girl.
And that about sums it up. What up, and shalom. Welcome to the Rob and Caleb Show, the show where theology matters, scholarship counts, and theology matters. My name is Caleb Haig, and with me, of course, Rob Van Hoff. What up, Rob? Sorry to our listeners out there who heard the the sound problems that we had in the very beginning. I don't know what was going on there, but looks like it's fixed, so we're happy about that. Let me just see if... Yeah, okay, good. All right. Well, what up and shalom to everybody in... Did you say no Rob? Rob, say something.
You can't hear me? Check. Can you hear me? Test.
No
Testing.
audio
1, 2.
coming through.
Can you hear me okay, Caleb?
Yeah, it looks like our radio is working just fine, but for some reason it says that our audio is not coming through in YouTube.
Check.
Okay.
Boom, 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 boom.
So some people say that they can hear everybody fine. Okay. Well, it looks like some people on YouTube are having trouble. Everyone, just refresh.
Refresh their browser.
If you can't hear us.
Technology.
All right. Yeah, technology. Woo! Okay. So, okay. Sorry about to anyone who can't hear us, but it looks like there are people in YouTube who can hear us. So, yeah. Okay. Well, that's the joys and the ups and downs of technology today. Rob, how you doing, man? Sorry, that it threw me off in the beginning, but now I'm back.
That's all right.
How's it going?
I'm excited. I got my basic initial draft and some refinement on my Galatians presentation and got that in because that's one where they asked, can you send to the moderator, or there's a respondent.
This is for your Galatians paper.
So I think it was last December they sent out the call for papers, and then they picked 4 papers, and I'm really humbled and honored that they chose mine. So I'm one of the 4, and then there's going to be a respondent. So
anyway, hang on. Now let's paint the picture for people who have never been to an ETS or an SBL. Basically, what's going to happen is there's going to be this room, and it's going to be on a Tuesday, so there probably won't be a ton of people. I mean, you never can tell, but the room will probably be, I don't know, we're going to say maybe 30, 40 people in this room, and there's going to be a table up front, and there's going to be 5 people at the table, and then a moderator, so really 6 people at the table. And what's going to happen is the moderator will get up
to the session.
Yeah, he'll welcome to the session, and then our first paper is done by this person, and that person will give their their paper, and
20
then
minutes,
20 minutes
10 discussion,
then 10 minutes discussion, and then the moderator will introduce the next person, so on and so forth until all 4 people are done. Then what's going to happen is the respondent is going to get up and totally slaughter.
He's got the
everything.
stick.
Yeah, everything. He's already pre-planned how he's going to dissemble.
Because we've in advance given him.
Yeah, he
sees our plans, right? He knows our.
And very politely, he's going to say, Rob Van Hoff is a total idiot because. And
he's not going to use those words. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's
really great. It's such a privilege and an honor. No matter what, I'm going to come away learning, and that's the point. But it's Dr. Daniel Ulucci, I believe is how you say it, Ulucci at Rhodes College, who's done some wonderful scholarship on early Judaism, early Christianity, and this is like really an exciting opportunity. So I'm
Can I tell you? Can I tell you where I am? So, I started writing my thesis. I don't know, maybe a year ago, and it's been a lot of research while at the same time, trying to write.
Finding your idea, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I didn't do, which I should have done, and this is that, thesis writing 101 for anyone who ever is going to write a thesis. One of the things you want to do is write down an outline of your thesis in the beginning so that you can see, okay, these are the points I'm going to make. And now here we go. Well, I'm just now going to write down my, this is how, out of step I am. I'm just now going to write down my outline of my thesis. And what I've realized is that my thesis, initially I had ideas of what it was going to be. Now it's kind of moved into different directions. It's still the same point. I'm still making the exact same point. But as I've researched, I've realized there's all these other avenues that I have to address because I didn't realize, I'm going to have to, for instance, the portion that I'm in right now is the liturgical tradition of the words of institution. So the words of institution are, do this in remembrance of me. And basically every scholar in the world will tell you, who's ever done Eucharistic studies, which is essentially what we're talking about and what I'm talking about in my thesis, they're going to tell you that these words of institution are actually part of a liturgy, and that both Paul and Luke inserted a liturgical tradition into what they're writing. So, can I show you the two books that I just received?
Oh yeah, let's see them.
So this is what I am reading right now. First is by Maxwell E. Johnson. This is a standard textbook. It's called The Rites of Christian Initiation. And I just started, I'm like 2 pages in. Good sized book. And this is really a very interesting, I'm already learning things from this. So basically he's talking about, Christianity, quote marks for those on the radio. Christianity is a religion and established religion now. And now people are coming into that religion. How are they initiated into Christianity? So that's number one. And then this one is really the one that I'm excited for. I had to read Johnson's book, The Rites of Christian Initiation, first before I get to this. Johnson co-authored with Paul Bradshaw. Paul Bradshaw is probably one of the leading voices in liturgical studies, Christian liturgical studies that's alive today. And
is he at Notre Dame?
No, he's
because he co-wrote the book on Passover and Easter, origins of Passover and origins of Easter, with Lawrence Hoffman, I think it is, and that's where the Israel Yuval. That's like I met Israel Yuval at a conference.
Bradshaw's no joke. He's certainly probably, I would consider him the top scholar in Christian liturgical studies that's alive today.
And the parallel for Jewish studies would be a guy named Lawrence Hoffman. I think it's Howffman. But they've worked together because they both are heavy into the development of ritual tradition and liturgy in both Jewish and Christian history.
The interesting thing about Bradshaw is that I thought he was just going to tote the common Christian line. The common Christian line is we see the liturgy or the Eucharist show up in Acts 2. He doesn't, which is interesting.
Right. He's bringing history. Bradshaw's going to bring a historical. Well, look at it, their evolution. So the very fact he's using the word evolution in the subtitle.
So the book that I'm holding up for those on the radio is The Eucharistic Liturgies, Their Evolution and Interpretation by Paul Bradshaw and Maxwell Johnson. I am so excited to read this book, and I've already read some of Bradshaw. And you're right, Bradshaw is at the University of Notre Dame. I stand corrected. So, yeah. Catholic, I'm sure. Anyway, so I'm very excited to read those, and this is going to be my reading material at the ETS and SBL.
Wow. So you're taking books to Boston.
I know. Watch out.
Rather than you'll come home with more, I'm sure.
Oh, I sure hope so. Okay. Well, welcome everyone who's in the chat room. We got a good showing in the chat room today, and we're happy to see everybody there. Welcome to everybody out on Torah Resource Radio. For those who don't know, I mean, obviously the people listening to the radio know, but for those who don't know, Torah Resource Radio switched back to our original format. And so it's lectures, teachings, shows, Bible studies, Bible readings, and then also music in between. And that's our original format, and we're back to that format. And so I encourage everyone to listen to TorahResource.com. You can do that by going to trradio.com and clicking the play button. And we are working on reformatting the schedule page and all that kind of stuff. So interesting things to come. And also we're going to redo the app, which we hope to have an initial app out very soon. And I should say that the Rob and Caleb Show is brought to you by TorahResource.com. Torah Resource is a wonderful place to find all sorts of great things. We make every product that we produce, we make available for free in some format at some point, and we run specials all the time on the materials that we do actually sell. And so, but you can find all sorts of free stuff and free resources at TorahResource.com. And of course, the Rob and Caleb Show is also brought to you by the generous support of our listeners. If you would like to help continue to, the Rob and Caleb Show on, you can help us by going to Torah Resource and donating to just pressing the donate button. And if you do that, I would encourage you to put into the notes at checkout that you listen to the Rob and Caleb Show. We always really, really, really appreciate hearing from people who listen to the show and are benefit from it. So yeah, we're thankful for all of our listeners. What are you looking for over there, Rob? I see you.
No, I got something to cover up part of my monitor, just so reduce
the glare.
That monitor glare on my eyes. Yeah, it's kind of.
Okay, let's get to it. Let's get straight to it. Well, I think that first of all, what we have to do is we need to address. Oh, I did not open up my show notes. Give me just a second here.
What?
I know. I'm as prepared as I am for today. I didn't open up my show notes. Okay, here we go. So last week we did a show, and show 194, and this is show 195 for those, obviously, for those who can count.
And as we get to, I don't know if it's going to be till 200, but Caleb is working on a new introductory music show starter.
That's right.
Stay tuned for that.
That's right. Now we've read things from this person before. Manim for Yeshua, 144,000. Manim for Yeshua has he's been upset at us before. He's also agreed with us before, and he kind of skirts the line between love and hate. And speaking of love and hate, for those who would like to, you can give us a call, tell us how much you love us or hate us. You can do that at 253-465-3205. That's our comment line. It's just a recording. So yeah, call us and tell us what you think. So this person, Manim for Yeshua, he left a comment on show 140. I'm sorry, 194 rather. And this is what he said. He said, what caused, for those who didn't tune into 194, we discussed the Reformation, right? We were continuing on our discussion of the Reformation and some of the effects that the Reformation had, and Luther, these kind of things. And so Manim for Yeshua says, what caused the Reformers to miss or reject Torah for sanctification, though? Eventually, we know the embers cooled and people got comfortable in denominations. Then only a precious few hungered for more. I guess that could be a whole other show topic. Okay, well, I wrote back and I said, well, I don't like these broad generalizations a lot of the time. Now, we all make them. I make broad generalizations a lot of the time as well. And actually, Rob is very good at catching me on these. So I'm not trying to down Manim for Yeshua in this. We all do it. But, when we make these broad generalizations, it makes it hard to actually have these kind of conversations. The reformers, a lot of the reformers really hungered for the truth of the word, and this is what brought about Reformation, to reform something, right? What they were reforming was the Catholic Church, essentially, and the Holy Spirit was working to make these men really thirst for truth and seek after truth, and this is what brought about that reform. And so I wrote back and I said, what part of Torah are you talking about? The reformers agreed that they should be keeping the Sabbath. Luther proclaimed the Sabbath was Saturday, not Sunday, although he was fighting more the authority of the Pope at that point. The Baptist Confession of 1689 says that the Sabbath is still in act, although they believed it was on Sunday. Spurgeon rejected the celebration of Christmas, as did most reformers until the 1900s. And all of the reformers agreed that we should love the Lord our God with all our heart and love our neighbor as ourselves. I reject the idea that the reformers, or even many within the modern Christian church, have rejected the Torah. They have rejected parts of it, but as a whole, they keep much of it. I think that one of the things that I'm going to argue today, as we go on in the show, is that the Reformation is still happening today, and that we see a huge part of that within the Torah movement, and that part of the Reformation now is the Torah movement coming along and realizing the part of the Reformation of sanctification, what sanctification is. So we're moving on into other things. The unfortunate part is that pendulum has swung now in terms of some of the aspects of, the doctrines of grace and whatnot, which we're going to talk about here with our movie review in just a few moments. And so Minim for Yeshua wrote back, and this is really the comment that we're trying to get to here. He says, so I asked him what part of the Torah. He says, the part of the Torah that sticks out the most. They never wore fringes, ate kosher, put any special emphasis on selling in the land of Israel or its agricultural shemitah. Settling in the land of Israel or its agriculturist shemitah years. Kept a 50-year Yovel. Kept the Moedim, circumcised, blew shofar, prayed or hoped for the rebuilding of the temporal mikdash. Observed nidah. That's the purification for women. I'm not sure how they would do that with no temple standing. Grew out their beards as a matter of obligation for men, which there was a discussion on this, and I think that this cannot be proven from Torah. Anyway, wore tefillin, etc., and a bunch more slipped my mind, which, while not as all important as love of God and neighbor as oneself, are definitely Torah. If Shabbat was mutable enough to change to a Sunday, and in modern churches to forget about entirely, it manifestly was never that essential in the first place. There's about 613 of them, give or take. And if this is the reckoning of Torah, then they have not been Torah observant. Let us not even get into the oral Torah, rabbinic whole, but the rabbinic whole, but ... There is something I'm beginning to hate about Torah resource, and that is that Torah observance can be virtually 100% whitewashed of its characteristically Jewish form, and still be Torah observance just as well. I'm sorry, but that's just hateful. To me, that is dumbfounding and increasingly offensive, and I'm not even Jewish myself. Okay, so this last part is what...
Wow, I appreciate that he had the... he's like, hey, I'm going to be bold. I'm just going to say what I feel. That's important.
Yeah, one of the things that I've realized in the past, there's been things going on that we don't share on the show and won't share on the show. But there's been one thing that I've realized is that humans, including myself, humans naturally, and I think Paul taught this too, naturally we have feelings. And these feelings, they don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. If your feelings don't go with what the scriptures say, your feelings don't matter. What matters is the scriptures. If you think that one thing is one way...
Caleb, how do you feel about that? No, I get it. I know what you mean.
But okay, so let's look at what he says. There's, hang on just a sec. In the chat room, somebody says, what's the symbol on Caleb's shirt? Tetragrammaton. No, it is not. It is Yeshua. And this is a shirt from one of our sponsors, Yeshua Shirts.
What?
YeshuaShirts.com. Go to YeshuaShirts.com and buy all your merchandise that says Yeshua on it so that you too can start a conversation. Okay.
Men, women, children, and even hoodies and hats now.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so let's go back. I want to read this one more time. There's something I'm beginning to hate about Torah resource, and that is the Torah observance can be virtually 100% whitewashed of its characteristically Jewish form. There is nothing characteristically Jewish about the Torah. You're right. I don't think that the Torah is Jewish at all. I think it's 100% not Jewish. It was given to the Jewish people. And what was it given to the Jewish people to do? Not to be theirs only, not for them to keep and have it be theirs, but to take to the nations, to give to the nations so that they could see the Messiah Yeshua through it. The Torah is God's culture. It's not Jewish culture. It's God's culture. And we know this from being able to look at Israel today. Go to Israel, walk into Tel Aviv, and tell me that the culture there is Torah. It's not. Just because God's
Jewish people.
You have Jewish people that were chosen. What were they chosen to do? They were chosen to take and let's go to the scriptures. This is in your show notes, by the way. Romans 3:1-2. Paul tells us specifically, then what advantage has the Jew? Or what is the benefit of circumcision? Great in every respect. First of all, that they were entrusted with the oracles of God. Not that God made oracles because of who they were, or that their culture brought forth the oracles of God. No, God had his oracles and gave it to the people. And what was that for? Isaiah 49:6. He says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. So the light goes to the nations. It's not that Israel keeps it and it's only theirs, and you have to be, you have to be Jewish to be able to enjoy it. The culture that comes from Torah is God's culture.
Just this morning I was having coffee with a good friend, and we were reading Habakkuk chapter 1 in Hebrew. And Habakkuk chapter 1 is when this is right at the end of the first temple period, right at the end of Solomon's temple. And he knows Babylon's coming and is going to destroy it. And he knows why. He says the Torah has become tafug. Torah is what it says. It means has become weak, or has become muted, and that the mishpat judgment does not go out to its end, because the judges are wicked and corrupt, and they're preventing God's revealed word, his law, from actually affecting society. And so the poor and the marginalized are not getting justice that God's law demands. Why? Because the judges are in the way. And this is part of the crisis that Habakkuk is praying about. How long, O Lord, right? And so we could pause right there at the end of the first temple period. So David's already been here, Solomon, all the kings of Judea, and the northern kingdom's already been wiped out by the Assyrians. And you have Habakkuk saying, look, God's Torah is not being taught by the Judean judges themselves. So that means for him, the Torah, would Habakkuk say the Torah has Jewish characteristics? Well, you would have to say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, no, ultimately Habakkuk would say, no, it's God's Torah, and that the Jews who have been in charge are accepting bribes. They're showing respect of persons, and so righteousness is not being actually legislated so that the righteous actually get vindicated and the wicked actually get condemned. Rather, you have the wicked getting justified, right? You have people who are criminals and should go to pay the penalty are actually getting off, and that right there is a picture of, you could say the same complaint there. You could go in Habakkuk's time. He's like, where's the Torah? Well, it's not about this putting an ethnic name on it. It's God's revealed word and his will, and the people of God acting in accordance to it.
Now that's not to say that the Jewish people don't have an advantage. Paul says it right there in Romans 3:1, right? Their advantage is much in every way, that they were given the oracles of God. In other words, they hold the oracles And they are now supposed to take them out to the nations.
And they're
accountable for it.
Right.
This is an advantage. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of the chosen people of God. That is Israel taking the tour to the nations. But believers can then attach themselves to Israel. Rob and I have talked many times about the idea that we have. It's not replacement theology. We don't believe in replacement theology. We believe in enlargement theology, right? That is that
I will gather more to them that are gathered. Like
exactly.
Isaiah. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our main topic. And I know that we had some problems in the beginning, so I don't even know where our show timer's at right now. We're probably somewhere around 25 minutes, but that's just fine. So let's move now to...
You know what? Can I say one more thing?
Of course you can.
Because one of the comments that was there was they didn't even long for the rebuilding of the temple. Well, that's like, I mean, we could go one by one through his criticisms, but that's not really fair. That's not I disagree with that characterization, is what I mean by that. Is Yeshua's disciples understood the temple's destruction as God's judgment, and they were looking for his return. They put his return and their hope for his return ahead of everything else. So that Yeshua's return trumped any idea of wanting to join in and build the temple again. I think that's an important thing because they saw it as a very severe judgment. The actual fulfillment of Yeshua himself gave the prophetic word concerning that in advance. Whereas Jewish non-believers in Yeshua they might have seen the temple as God's judgment, but not with reference to Yeshua. Or they might have seen the temple's destruction as Roman wickedness, and they probably could have interpreted it different ways depending on their theological bent. But the disciples of Yeshua they couldn't interpret it any other way. Why would a disciple of Yeshua try to interpret the destruction of the temple other than the simple fulfillment of Yeshua's words, and that until, like the end of Matthew 23, until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, you will not see me, that was their heart's cry. And their mission was to take it out, like you pointed out, Caleb. Anyway, just one little side point.
Okay. Let's move on to our main topic because this actually could take quite some time. There's a filmmaker named Les, and I'm going to butcher his last name, and I apologize to Les for this. His last name, I think, is Lanphere. Lanphere, I don't know. He's a filmmaker, and he's also a Calvinist, and he embarked on a project. I believe it was crowdfunded.
Yeah, it was Kickstarter. They had if you watch to the end, more Kickstarter, and then they have it even more Kickstarter. Yeah, so Kickstarter was a big
so great. They put
organizing tool.
They put it up on Kickstarter, and this is how he funded this documentary. The documentary is called Calvinist, and it is now available. And for those who receive our show notes, it's in a link to this is in your show notes. And if you don't subscribe to our show notes, which you should do by going to TorahResource.com, hovering over the radio tab, and going down to the Rob and Caleb Show, and then there's a sign-up form on there to receive our show notes. But if you don't, you can just put in Calvinist movie into a Google search, and you will find it right away. And so Rob and I both watched it this week. I watched it essentially 1.5 times. I kind of went through it a second time. And so we wanted to talk about this. This is an interesting. I think it's. Initial thoughts. Let me just say this. There is no doubt that Les is a professional at what he does. This movie is incredibly well done.
Oh yeah, well, agreed. Yeah.
The editing, the cinematography, the everything about it. The
audio, the music was well done.
Everything.
The J something. I don't remember the name.
Even their performers. I watched a behind the scenes thing on their cello player who came in and donated the time to end the performance. She was fantastic. And I've played the cello for 30 years, and she's no joke. They did very well. The production of this movie is I have not seen a better documentary about anything Christian, I don't think, ever. It really was that well done. He's certainly a professional. And so just for the production value alone, whether or not, and for those who might not know, Rob and I hold to the doctrines of grace, which is often called Calvinism. And I accept that. I accept that term. I'm a 5-point Calvinist. This is, for those who don't know, within the Messianic and the Hebrew roots movement, we are like the odd guys out, right? Now, there's a growing number of people within the Torah movement that are coming to believe in the doctrines of grace, and I think that's excellent. But within the Messianic, the Hebrew roots movement, we are certainly the minority, big time minority. So whether or not you agree with the doctrines of grace or not, this movie is certainly worth watching. And I went and I took the time to look at a review. This is also in your show notes, a review by Dr. Flowers, who is an ex-Calvinist, and he reviewed this movie as well. Interesting review. The review itself was very interesting. It seems like he got stuck kind of in a rut and spent a significant about 25 minutes of his time was dedicated to his idea that that Les was, whether he knew it or not, was attempting to paint Arminian theology subtly. He was subtly trying to paint Arminian theology as these people who have bad theology and don't really, they're which it was so subtle that I would have never thought that. I see his points now that he brings them up. Yeah. Anyway, so let's get into this a little bit. Overall, I mean, I'll tell you right off the bat, and this is a little backwards from what we normally do with movie reviews. What Rob and I normally do with movie reviews is we'll talk about everything, and then we'll give you our final rating of what we think it was. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to give you the initial rating at the beginning, and the reason why is because basically what I'm going to say about this film is I thought this was like a straight A. It wasn't an A-, it wasn't an A+, it was an A. And that's a very high rating for me. That's like 4.5 stars. You can hardly get a better rating on a movie from me. I can't even think of a movie that I'd give 5 stars to. And especially theologically, because people are always going to have theological differences, right? Overall, I thought this movie was a huge win. I think it's very well done. I think it put forward the theology in a way that was very understandable, even for a younger audience. And on all of these levels, I thought it was excellent. And I would encourage anyone, whether you believe in the doctrines of grace or not, to take a look at this movie. I think it's really it's a win. He definitely did well. But the reason that I'm going to give you the rating up front, my opinion of the rating, is because now we're going to talk about all the things that we didn't like about it. And so I want you to know this is not to put down the movie as a whole. In fact, I take this as a shining review, a wonderful review of this movie. I highly recommend buying it. I think that congregations could watch it together. I think that it's very worth the money to rent and or buy. I bought it. And I would encourage other people to do the same. That's my review of the movie. What about you, Rob? What do you think?
I liked the movie. I would probably give it, I would say a B+ or maybe an A-.
Okay.
I agree concerning production value and the music and the sound editing and the graphics, right? They did a great job. They went to multiple locations to reach a diverse audience of, as we know, they didn't. I don't think they didn't really interview any Armenians, but they did show clips, for example, of Joel Osteen and Kenneth Copeland, and I'm trying to remember if there are others.
Rob Bell,
Brian McLaren.
And this is okay. So wait, hang on, just like this.
But those weren't direct interviews. Those were clips. From produced products from those different
And this is actually Dr. Flowers' criticism of it, is that his biggest criticism in the whole thing wasn't, I mean, obviously he holds to Arminian theology, so he doesn't agree with this, and I'm sure he has other teachings on why Arminian theology is right.
Yeah, he doesn't like the way they characterized Arminian.
Well, what he says is, you got these guys like Rob Bell. I mean, this doesn't care,
like
this
straw man. Yeah,
this is not representation of good Arminian theology. Is his
also they portrayed Arminianism as a step back to medieval Catholic theology, right? They basically said you Arminians are really like Catholics, and not in that short of a bite, but they said basically that's what he was trying to do, even though maybe he hadn't thought it through. So
maybe he had thought it through.
Yeah, that's true too.
I mean, honestly, where does the idea of he correlates, he shows why, I mean, very briefly, but I think he shows why he believes that.
Right.
Where did the Reformation
let me
come from?
Continue with my
ahead.
review. We might show it to a group of people, and if we do, we would probably skip parts.
Parts or part?
Part. Oh, well, I don't know. I'd have to watch it again to remember. But there are parts I think that are valuable. There are parts where they cite the scripture. Like, for example, there's a segment where they have a great sermon by John Piper, and he's citing Genesis.
Oh, hang on just a sec. Well, wait, we have this clip. So, I mean,
I didn't know we were using these clips. Okay.
Yeah, don't jump the clips. I'm just looking for an overall review first.
I would say B+, A-. I think that there are major, very well stated points along the way. And one of the key ones is, which came first, regeneration or faith? Is faith a gift does God activate faith in our life, or are we the originators of faith? And the way this movie portrays that question is that, is it something we do, or is it something that God puts in us and we're regenerated, and then as a fruit of that seed happens? And the Calvinist movie says of that problem, when you couch it in that terms, the Calvinist says that God acts, God regenerates somebody, and then fruit starts to grow from that point. And that it's a one-way ticket. I mean, it's the rapper Shai Lin is on there, and he says, he explicitly says this is without the permission of the person. God doesn't consult, and the like is likened to Lazarus. Just like Yeshua didn't consult with Lazarus to get his permission to raise him from the dead, that is the important model. And now it might be that, like, Dr. Flowers will disagree with that characterization. He says, oh, you're mischaracterizing Arminianism. Well, maybe that is the case in his eyes, but I think that, to me, I can't dismiss that picture. So that point comes along strong, and the future of the One Torah movement, in my opinion, is going to be built off that conviction. If someone does not have that core conviction that righteousness is by faith, and that faith is the fruit of the regeneration of God by the power of his will, by the power of the Holy Spirit, and through the preaching of who Yeshua is, the preaching of the gospel, then there's no future for the One Torah movement. So I would take away that as...
Hang on just a sec. But you said you would skip parts. I'm going to show this to a group as well, by the way. I'm not going to skip anything. In fact, just the opposite. But hang on just a sec. But you know what? The confession part, and we have a clip of this. The confession part, and we'll talk about this when we get to it. I would play that because I think it's a good thing to talk about and a good thing to discuss. Okay. I don't think it's worth skipping. Okay, let's start with the first criticisms. And what I did was I saw Rob sent me a list of his criticisms. Actually, I think he sent me 5 criticisms in total, maybe 6. Out of all of those, he actually asked me to clip 3 or 4 of the clips that I already had on my list. So outside of the clips that you chose, I only have 1 clip that I wanted to take. And then I took a clip from Flowers as well. So let's listen to some of these clips. We'll go in order, starting with yours first. So we'll start with yours. We'll get your criticisms, and then we'll go from there. Here's the first one. This is a portion. We'll set this up a little bit. This is a portion. They're going to talk about. They're going to use Isaiah 51 as their source text here to make their point. Let's listen to it.
So remember what you were like. Isaiah says, look to the pit from which you've been digged. Remember how corrupt you were, how selfish you were, how you clung to salvation by man, if you believed in salvation at all. Be as patient with them as God was patient with you.
Okay, so what's your criticism of this? Why do you find this?
Sadly, Norm, I'm big on cite and sources, and obviously we know this is I can tell you where it is in the movie. This is at 52 minutes in, almost 53 minutes in, but I failed in that I didn't get the name of this person voice. Because remember, there's multitude of voices, so I'm sorry about that. You have to watch the movie, but I can tell you where it is. This is one of the voices, pro-Calvinist, of course. He is citing Isaiah 51 to say, look, where Isaiah says, look to the pit from which you were dug, he interprets that as saying, look at your depraved state. Acknowledge your depraved state and that how you were trying to earn your own righteousness, and now you're not there anymore. And so this is a complete misreading and misapplication of Isaiah 51. And that stuck out, and I'm like, why would he even do that? That lessens the movie to me. It totally lessened the movie. And this is, if you look at Isaiah 51, he says, look to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, to the quarry from which you were dug. So the rock and the quarry. And then it says, look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who gave birth to you in pain. It's a poem. He was one, and I called him. I blessed him and multiplied him. Indeed, the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. Her wilderness will be like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and sound of a melody. Okay, this is about God's promise to Abraham and trusting in God's promise. Looking to the rock means looking to Abraham. Looking to the pit means look to Sarah, meaning it's not a picture of look at how depraved you are. It's he says, look at how I chose one person and I have a plan, and trust me. Right? That's the message here. It's not one of depravity. I don't see Isaiah 51, 1 through 3 in any way. Like the way you'd if you wanted to quote Isaiah, you'd go to later in, I think, is it 59? My righteousness was as filthy rags or something like that. Go to one where it actually means that. So that was what I would consider
an error in reference.
A misdirect. Yeah, I think there's way better passages. I hope he hasn't preached that message out of Isaiah 51. I just can't see it in there. If I'm wrong, send me a note. Let me know if you think if I'm crazy. But I do not see total depravity in Isaiah 51, 1 through 3.
I agree with you.
It's not there.
The next clip that we're going to play is of Piper. Now, they didn't. I bet I can tell what happened. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and I have no knowledge of this whatsoever. This is just my daydreams getting away with me. Piper was not in this movie except for clips of him preaching.
Oh, and as a younger man too, and as an old. They had him young and
old.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that they're saying, now I think I take a little bit different take on this. I went back and I watched it probably four times, and I tried to get some of the context of this as well to see if we could really see what the movie was trying to say about this clip. I have a feeling that Piper was probably too busy or unable to give an actual interview. Piper is looked at as one of the heroes of the Young, Restless, and Reform movement. Yeah. And a lot of people in this movie, and at this point in the documentary, all these people are saying, he has multiple clips in a row of, Piper. I listened to Piper, and it was like radically new from everybody else, and all that, so they're really trying to show how John Piper was this voice that really kind of sparked an insurgence of people coming to Calvinistic theology. I think you took this different than me. And the reason why is because what you're going to hear in this clip for those listening is Piper is really emphasizing it in the Genesis passage where Joseph says, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. But I think the way that you took it is that the documentary is putting, or Piper is putting a term behind it. But I don't think that's the point of the clip. They never explain what it is. Piper never.
Yeah, but he says it or something. He does this. He hammers on this it.
I know, but if you listen right after that, the point that is made is Piper is passionate in his preaching. This is a point where he gets really passionate about it. We don't know what he's preaching on. That's how I took it. Let's listen to the clip. I pulled 1 minute and 29 seconds in total of this.
John Piper.
John Piper.
John Piper.
John Piper is the preacher theologian of this movement.
Dr. Piper, God used to reshape the way that I see the world in terms of God, his sovereignty and might and power, his commitment to the glory of his own fame in the world, his sovereignty over the world, and in terms of God's purpose in creating me.
So Genesis 50, verse 20, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Don't let any preacher tell you it means use. As if you're going to get God off the hook for meaning it. You, wicked brothers of mine, meant it for evil. Meant it. It, the evil, meant it. God, same word, meant it, evil, meant it, for good. I could just go home now.
What draws people is his passion.
Okay, see, so now they go into his passion. They never explain what he's preaching about there. That's how I took it.
Oh, well, I'm taking it there. This is an advocacy for sovereignty. Now, you're right. I agree with you. They did not pause and then say, he's preaching, hear him preach about the sovereignty of God using Exodus or Genesis 50, verse 20. You're right. Fair enough. They didn't actually say that. They're bringing about his passion. So, But
you could be right. Maybe that's what Piper was preaching on.
Because this would be a good verse to do that with. But my point is, the way he's reading it, the word "it" makes it sound like it's the same thing, and there were two different intentions on it. And I don't read that. That's not really the way it sounds to me. And again, I'm giving you my opinion, and if you think I'm crazy, then let me know. But if you look at the Hebrew, and because he's saying same word, and it's true that the word lachashov, to consider, to think, is used. It's not the word use, and he makes that point, and that's correct. God used evil to do good. That's not what he's saying. Or that's not what Piper is saying. If you hear a preacher saying God used evil to accomplish good, don't believe him. I agree with Piper on that. That's true. It's the it thing that I got, because it says Vatem hashavtem alai ra'ah. You reckoned concerning me evil. You thought evil about me. That's literally the first phrase. You thought evil about me. There's no it. There's no direct object. The direct object is in the second phrase. Elohim chashava letova. Elohim considered it good so that he would do so what he has done as this day, to save many people. In other words, God was going to deliver people, and he was going to use Joseph to do it.
In other words,
that's what's going to happen.
You threw me into a pit because you hated me. But God had you throw me into a pit to save
There's a larger
everyone.
Kind of story here. So maybe maybe I'm right. Of course I'm right. No, I could totally be misunderstanding Dr. Piper here. I think he is passionate. I think he's got a great passion. I've been blessed by his passion, even last year in San Antonio in his preaching on purity of heart. I would just, I didn't, the way he was going, back and forth there, to me,
missed the mark.
Just kind of distracted, and it sounded kind of confusing. That's all I have to say there.
Can we pause for a second? You referenced my one of our sound clips. And we've had several criticisms. One of the things about this show, when people, I think a lot of people don't realize, we take criticism extremely seriously. When people
and we receive it. Yeah.
And we receive it. And when people, especially people we respect and we like, tell us something, it's not just like okay, whatever. We have not only the team of people at Torah Resource who look at the criticism that we get, but also we have people that will ask outside of Torah Resource that aren't even Messianic that we will go to and ask if they think that we've crossed any kind of a line or anything like that. One of the criticisms that we got from several people now is that the soundboard that we have has too many sounds that sound as if they are mocking. So I've gone through and I've taken out almost every sound clip that we have. I have a couple of songs, our mail time song, our self-centered song.
And the la 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 la.
And
we have to keep that one.
Yeah, I saved that one. You've been blessed. The Hoff goes off.
Can we listen to that one?
We can always listen to that one.
How rude!
Why do you hate the Rob and Caleb show?
Honestly, I think they're vain, stupid, and incredibly self-centered.
I only saved 2 voice clips in total. I took every other voice clip out, and I'll show you why I saved the 2. I didn't think that. Here's the 2 voice clips that I saved.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
And then also,
I can't believe we already discussed this.
Those are the 2 audio clips, or the voice clips I saved. Besides that, everything is sound effects. I got a harp. I can have suspenseful music. Anyway, so I don't even have the clip anymore that you referenced. Let's keep going.
Good.
Okay. There's a couple of clips that we have left from what you pulled. Here's one. Now I can't remember what clip this is. This is one of 2 clips. Let's take a listen and then we'll discuss it.
We need a reformation in terms of ecclesiology. When we see younger people that are very much interested in listening to Reformed preachers, on YouTube, sitting in a coffee shop on the Lord's Day, and they're not immersed into the life of a local church. They're not under authority in a local church, but they call themselves Reformed. They call themselves, a Calvinist.
Okay, hang on just a second. I want to pause right there. Now, you wanted me to clip this, I think, because of the phrase Lord's Day. They're sitting on...
in parallel with the other one where they talk about the Lord's Day, it's coming across that the Lord's Day, and they say from Sunday to Sunday. So the idea of someone in a coffee shop watching a preaching on a YouTube on the Lord's Day and they want to call themselves Reform, they're taking issue with that person, right? That's what I took away from that. Did you take away something different from that clip?
Well, honestly, when it comes to Christianity, I just expect that, in mainstream Christian, now this is starting to change. We're starting to see a change. People are coming back to the truth of a Saturday Shabbat and keeping that Saturday Shabbat, right? We see people coming out of Christianity, and not out of Christianity. I shouldn't even say out of Christianity. That's not even a good representation. We see people within Christianity coming to the belief that the Sabbath should be kept and that we should keep it on a Saturday. But as a whole, and especially among mainstream Christian preachers, it's just assumed that God changed the Sabbath to Sunday.
Right.
And therefore they call it the Lord's Day, and therefore this is what they're going to refer to. No, you know, I expect that from Christianity, and therefore I expect it. I would expect it in something like this. So therefore, it didn't. I mean, it bothers me obviously that.
Did you get the sense that the idea of being in the coffee shop was a transgression?
Yes, absolutely.
Because of what day of the week it was. In other words, if they were watching videos and sipping coffee Monday through Saturday, they wouldn't have a quibble.
Yes, but I think the point is not that it's a Sunday Sabbath. I think
that's where the gathering of the body is.
It's that you need to be part of a community, and that you need to be part. And in this case, they're going to say church. What they mean by church in the beginning of this documentary, I think Washer even says. He says, you know, we have to be careful about how what we classify as the body of Christ. In other words, the ecclesia is what he's talking about. What is church? In other words, is what he's saying. Now, what is so hard hitting about this is that you're right. Washer's comment after this has to be taken into consideration. And boy, is this is a bold statement from Washer. Listen to what he says. Now, I'm going to rewind this a little bit so we get this other guy coming into Washer's statement.
Themselves Reformed. They call themselves, a Calvinist.
I don't care if you're hearing the greatest preachers in the world every day on YouTube. I don't care if you're giving your body to be burned or offering everything you have to the poor. If you are not a viable, serving, dedicated, devoted member to a visible local church, you are outside of the will of God.
Oh, some pretty intense words. Here's the thing is that, I mean, and this could probably be a show in and of itself. Do we agree with Washer on this? Because you know what? A piece of me has to say, yes, I agree with Paul Washer on this. And the reason why is because Yeshua says, I will build my ecclesia. Now, as quickly as I say that, we got people in the chat room. We got people, all over the nation and outside of the nation that are in remote places. They don't have a community, a viable community around them. And I don't think that a community necessarily means a little white church with a steeple and you got to go into your church every Sunday. No. A community could be your family with another family sitting down and studying the Word every week, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have a definition of what a community is. But one of the things that we do see, and this happens even, Beit Hillel, the congregation I go to, they're very leery about broadcasting the service on the internet. And the reason why is because they don't want people to get comfortable with the idea that this is my community. I can sit in my bed on Shabbat and I can watch online and I'm part of the community.
Right. The ecclesia is not a physical building. It's a network of people. A network, it's lives that are tied together, people who will share their deepest struggles with one another, pray and fast for each other. Like, you know what? I'm going to pray. Let's pray and fast together. Someone bringing, hey, my extended family has this kind of just difficult situation, and we rally together, we pray, we go help out, we make meals, having the physical meeting is important, but that's not what the ecclesia is. Because if you take that building away, this is one thing that my good friend Adam always points out. What an ecclesia is, that if the building's gone,
the people are still there.
The network of people are still in touch, right? They're still praying for each other. They're still sharing the stories. Even if they move, if someone moves, they're still in touch in that relational connection. That is the building of the ecclesia, because those are bonds that are going to last, into eternity, right? That is the core piece. We're not talking about, like you said, a little white church with the steeple, Good.
Well, so Lois says some interesting things here. She says, why won't this... Anyway, okay. Lois says some interesting things here. She says, Washer will not accept donations to his ministry if you aren't first tithing to a local fellowship. That's interesting. And she also says, not according to Washer. Home churches don't count unless they have a pastor/authority. Well, You know what?
Did she say according to him or not according?
According to Paul Washer, a home church doesn't count unless they have a pastor or authority. I tend to agree with that.
Well, they have to have someone who's responsible for exegeting the scriptures.
And not only that,
for,
but
for
even
being immersed in the word and making sure, basic.
But that tends to happen. That tends to happen in home churches. No matter, and I've seen this numerous times. If you
There's
have
so many home churches that split. You get people getting together and then they have a dispute and it splits.
If you have two families that are getting together, what naturally tends to happen, usually, and this isn't across the board, but usually what tends to happen, if you have two churches or two families that are getting together as a study, both the dads in the families usually tend to take up that leadership role, right? And they're seen as the leaders. I mean, even, I have a Bible study that I started with a couple of guys, and from the very beginning, what we did was we established the authority of that Bible study. That was the very first thing we did. There's 3 of us. Now there's other people who have come to the Bible study, but essentially, us, the 3 guys who got together and just, we established some ground rules, and that's how it goes. So I tend to agree with Washer on this. I think we need to be careful. Obviously there are circumstances, but I think that if you don't have a community and you're in a place where there isn't a viable community, you should be actively trying to. Even before the internet, this same thing happened, right? My dad said, well, people would stay at home and they didn't have anywhere to go. What would they do? They'd read Spurgeon. They'd read Spurgeon's, books on Sunday.
Right.
So the internet didn't spawn this. This has been going on for a very long time. I think that even if you're in a remote place, it's important to try to continue to pray and ask God to build a community where you are. Okay, let's keep going. Now, this was probably the most controversial part of, and probably one of the biggest criticisms I have of this documentary, Calvinist. Rob and I both wanted the same clip. We both pulled the same clip, and here it is.
The confession itself is not our authority. The Scripture is our authority. In fact, the first article in most confessions is about the authority and sufficiency of Scripture.
While those confessions are not the standard, they represent the life and labor of believers who were filled with the Spirit of God, who spent their lives poring over this book. And so for someone to toss out the confessions as irrelevant and not necessary is to deny that he has been working in the people of God for 2,000 years.
Okay.
That last argument, all you have to do is change it to rabbis and Talmud, and you have the same argument.
Well, not only that, but
oral Torah.
The very next thing the very next thing that the film does is cut to somebody who then mentions a bunch of the confessions. But the confessions that they mention, none of them are from the past 2,000 years. They're from the Reformation.
They're from the past
500, 400 or 500 years.
Yeah.
So he says the past 2,000 years. Well, no, a lot of the creeds and a lot of the councils that came from the past 2,000 years are Catholic. And this certainly is one of the places where I think that this documentary missed the mark. And Jeff Durbin is the one who made that comment, that last comment. Jeff Durbin is he's with Apologia, and he has a talk show. And actually, to be honest with you, I think Jeff Durbin is doing some great work for the kingdom. I disagree with him, obviously, on some things, but he's got a fervor for the word.
It felt, back to the overall production, it felt like this clip, pardon me, on the confessionals, because it's like a minute and a half to 2 minutes. It's like they had to put it, we want to put something about the confessionals in the movie, and we're not sure where to put it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they put it, and they have this section for the confessionals, and then they're back to, and they're back on a different topic having to do with.
It's like the adulterous woman.
Yeah.
We don't know where to put it. Maybe it's at the end of Luke. Maybe it's in Mark. We don't know.
Anyway, it's important. Here's what is important. It's important that God's people are immersed in the Word and are writing and preaching about it and saying what they believe. Because the guy, forgive me, one of the first voices in the confessional segment there is, okay, you say, Americans all over will say, I believe the Bible. But what do you believe when you say you believe the Bible? What do you believe about the Bible when you say that? And that he says that the confessionals are like staking a flag and claiming territory. Say, this is what I mean. And I'm standing by an interpretation, and I can boil down or codify that interpretation in some sort of text that then we'll have a bunch of people read this text and we all agree. So it's a fruit of preaching and teaching of God's word and exegesis, no doubt. But the way it was so narrowly focused that it left out, all the people, like, what about just the Greek language or the Hebrew language and all the efforts of God's people to learn the languages of the Bible better and to learn the history better and to learn or missionaries. So God works in the building of his ecclesia in all these different realms. And I think the teaching and preaching of the word from people who are anchored in the original languages, anchored in the word, is core. And that's the good thing behind these confessionals. But the confessional also has to do the us versus them. It's like we are this and we're not like the other guys, right? Like for me, I grew up in this Lutheran they called it the Lutheran confession. They didn't even mention the Lutheran confession, different confessions on this movie, right? Because that's a different strain than Calvinist. So by the confession is meant like a doctrinal body or text. It's text that is put together to say this is what differentiates us from others. And if we go back to the bigger picture of always reforming, that we're always learning, we're not going to arrive, but we're always moving forward to be more fruitful, that we can't hold to any of these things are really temporary traditions of men built on the best efforts of God's people during that time. But for us to go and we have to just uphold the Bible first and foremost. And so anyway, this segment, like I was thinking maybe not show it, but you're right. You can show it and then talk about it,
Well, actually, I think that, one of the things about the confessions, and not only the confessions, but the catechisms, right? So, which are a form of the confessions. But, like the Heidelberg Confession, there's some great material in there. And there are things in that
it's thick theology, right?
It's not only thick theology, but it's things that as a child you learn. I was taught parts of the Westminster Catechism as a young child, as a very young child, maybe 6, 7 years old. Those things still stick in my mind. There are answers to those. So, and good things. Not all of it is necessarily, but okay, let's keep going. We have just a couple more clips, actually 4 clips in total that we need to get to. This one is titled "Jump the Wall," and I'm not sure if we agree on this or not.
If we are genuinely reformed, it is because we believe reformed to be a suitable nickname and adequate summary of what the Bible teaches about key points of doctrine and about a particular world and life view.
But we have a completely different perspective. We don't have the perspective of the majority culture. We're minorities, and the truth is the truth, so we're going to embrace it. But we're also, once we step into the room, we're going to acknowledge that, wait a second, we're not talking about cultural neutrality here. Like, there's a culture in this room, and it's not our culture, so we have to leap over a wall to participate in this room. But we're here. Hi. You ready? You ready for us?
Yeah, I love, that's Shylin, who's a rapper. And if you listen to his, I don't know much about hip hop. I grew up listening to a different style of music, but I've listened to enough of his stuff to hear it is just intense rap, but it's absolutely grounded in scripture. I mean, he's pushing the sovereignty of God to he's pushing Tulip almost at every point. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty cool. And he's coming from the black culture in America saying, look, we have, we're a minority culture, and just like now forgive me again, I don't know the name of the preacher, African-American preacher before that, saying Reformed is a shorthand word for, and he says it's an acceptable or adequate. He used the word adequate. I totally agree. It's an adequate shorthand for describing sound biblical theology. And so the point here of these voices from marginal cultures is that they are saying, look, we see ourselves as in agreement with what is called core Reform tradition, and we agree that it is the sound approach to reading the scriptures and to understanding them. However, they're also saying there are cultural differences that we can't ignore, but we see our unity is going to be big enough to embrace these cultural differences. And the call here is discernment, again, between the traditions of man and the Word of God, right? And Yeshua has the highest standard for us, right? Yeshua doesn't say, I want you guys to be C+ disciples, right? No, his standard is the top standard, is the Torah of the Messiah. That means that we aim for accurate, precise differentiation between the Word of God and the tradition of men. And that's a super, super high calling. And that's the trajectory, that's the star we steer by while we're pursuing we pursue him and we pursue righteousness in this world. That's a core differentiation. And other, for example, in Orthodox Judaism, you don't have that. It's all Torah, right? You can't, you're no longer Orthodox if you start saying, well, the Halakha is a tradition of man and it's not obligatory, right? If you start saying that, well, you've just excused yourself from that society. And what I love about Shai Lin's point is that he's saying, look, it's a beautiful thing. These are beautiful doctrines, and they unite, and they're bigger than any one culture. And so the elite white guys, that European white guys that were some of the original voices of this, need to continue to be reformed too, right? And start to discern baggage that doesn't belong as part of that reform thing. And so when his perspective is coming in as a minority, he says there's a bit of a wall there that they have to jump over. And it could be because there's a sense of maybe numbness, maybe on that. And so I don't know, Caleb, what are your thoughts?
I listened to it twice because the first time I listened to it, I thought I took the take that you took. The second time I listened to it, I wondered if what he's really talking about is the minority of being Reform in general, as opposed to Arminian. In other words, when we're in a room, the room is predominantly Arminian. We have a wall to jump over in terms of Reformed theology just to be able to be a part of the conversation. So,
because he said that they talked about social injustice. The whole setup with the diamond was that there was that social injustice had even been expressed within Reformed tradition, and how that's a tradition of man that needs to be weeded out.
And so, no, I think you might be right. And since you took that take on it, I think I think you're probably right. Okay, let's move on. Let's keep going to the next clip.
The most important thing we can do in our lives is to fulfill the purpose for which we were created, which is to worship God.
We gather on the Lord's Day, Sunday after Sunday. We seek to worship Him in accordance with His Word. And that means that everything that we do finds a positive warrant in the Word of God, either through command or example or principle, that we want our worship to be radically biblical.
I agree with everything he said, except we see the institution of that Lord's Day kind of thing. And that is part of the tradition of man, that has not yet fully been discerned in the circles that produce this movie. They're going to come up, if you mentioned, well, what about Shabbat? It's almost absolutely predictable play by play what they're going to say, right? I mean, there's a programmed response that is going to be extra biblical. And they might cite, oh, well, in Revelation, he says, and I was on the Lord's Day, or in Acts 16, it said, on the Lord's, or the first day of the week, and it's like, really? So again, I think that there's a lot of good stuff here to build within one Torah, whatever we call that. But I think we're going to see these things that pop out to us, that a person who's, let's say, just coming from a mega church and they watch this movie and they're super excited and they go to the cage stage. I do. Oh, that was something I really appreciated. That was one of the best parts. They did spend time on what they call the reformed cage stage.
Yeah, it's good.
And how it's like once a person
I've been in that stage.
Convicted concerning the doctrines of grace, they need to be caged for a couple of years while they, prevented from hammering other people with it. Because they're overly zealous. All these guys I remember when I was in the cage stage. Yeah. I remember when I was in. So I really appreciated how there was a laughing at themselves. And
okay, hang on though, because going back to this clip on worship, one of the things that I appreciate about this documentary, and one of the things that I appreciate about one of the things that they showed, and they have Summer White in the. As one of the people talking, and for those who don't know,
listened. She does a podcast, right, or something.
Yeah,
I never listened.
Sheologans instead of theologians, it's sheologians.
Yeah.
And the one I listened to, she was like, "We put the her in hermeneutics."
Yes, I like it. I like that.
It's James White's daughter, and
I didn't know that. Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so I mean, she's she comes from a tradition of apologetics. So Summer White, I think she kind of talks about this a little bit too. Is that within Christianity, it's like the younger kids, the younger generation, and the younger pastors, right? This Paul Washer and John Piper, they come up. And they're not looking for the let's go to church on Sundays and we'll put in our time and that's it. No, they're looking for 7-day-a-week relationship with God. And what ultimately comes from that is a want of discipline and a want of action. A want to, they want to do things for God. And this is essentially where a lot of the vibrant youth come into the Calvinistic theology. And what I think about that is that, once again, this is what the Torah movement is essentially coming from the same place. And we can see the Reformation, if the Messianic and Hebrew roots movement the pendulum will swing back from errant theology of denying the deity of the Messiah, of giving up on sola scriptura, on giving up on sola fide, on rejecting things like the doctrines of grace. If we can swing back to good, solid biblical theology, then the next step naturally will be sanctification through God's word, which is Torah. In other words, the natural progression of the Reformation is not just we are justified by faith alone, by grace from God, not of us, but from God. Now, the next step is what is the sanctification step? And the sanctification step is Torah. And actually, that's where I want to go with my clip. Now, that was the end of Rob's clips. I have two clips. This first one is on Outlook. This is right in the beginning of the documentary. This is when they bring in Rob Bell, a clip from Rob Bell, and they're kind of showing these other people who are, just love everybody. Everyone's going to be saved. Just love everybody, and we're good. And this is kind of what they're showing. Now, people didn't, the younger generation didn't like that.
They went to the internet to go looking for answers, and they found...
He's talking about the younger generation when he says they went to the internet.
To go looking for answers, and they found people engaging, interacting. Two alternatives sprang out. The first was the emerging church. They had leaders like Brian McLaren, of course.
Brian McLaren, whose theology was very liberal and revisionist.
I think there's this feeling that in some ways Christianity has distorted Jesus and distorted the message of Jesus. And so there's this sense that, boy, we wish we could get to the bottom of what Jesus' message really was about.
The idea was if we don't change our theology, then the church is going to be lost.
Many in the emerging church were communicating that our biggest problem is that the historic Christian faith is simply outdated.
What gets subtly sort of caught and taught is that Jesus rescues you from God. But what kind of God is that we would need to be rescued from this God? This is why lots of people want nothing to do with the Christian faith. They see it as an endless list of absurdities and inconsistencies, and they say, why would I ever want to be a part of that?
Option one was to say that we've been too dogmatic for too long, and it's time to tear up the foundation and start over from scratch. But there was another option.
Okay, so basically what he's setting up here is there's two options. We've been too dogmatic, we need to love everybody and let everything go, and we don't need any, there doesn't need to be any real accountability here. And then the other option is Reformed theology. And this is actually what Dr. Flowers has a problem with. But what I see, and I actually wrote this down just to try to put my thoughts more into, I said one of my criticisms of the movie I would have is that while they do show the Arminian theology to be one that constantly needs to be worried about, am I doing enough? In other words, if I don't share the gospel with this person, will God, they could be lost forever. That's on me. This person is going to hell because I didn't say the right words, or I didn't bring up, I brought up Romans instead of Ephesians 2, or, what missteps did I make? So that's kind of one of the worries of Arminian theology. And am I doing enough? Am I losing my salvation?
And I've heard this, no kidding, that there's the great Bema seat. Have you heard the great Bema seat preach? Mm-hmm. The great Bema seat of Christ is the judgment seat, is when you're a believer, and when you go to heaven, God's going to show you all the people that are going to hell because you didn't preach to them.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to stand before the Bema seat of God and watch all those souls. So in other words, your first day in heaven is going to be God showing you all the places you failed and the eternal consequences of that failure. I'm just like, they use this kind of message to leverage people into like some sort of action.
So the point of this documentary, I think, is, or one of the points made in this documentary is the view of Calvinism as opposed to that, is that I am free to serve God. In other words, the weight is lifted, and now I serve him because he saved me. While this is certainly true, there's more to it than this. I don't just serve God because he saved me. In other words, I don't love my wife and I'm not in a constant covenant relationship with my wife just because she said yes, or, put it the other way around. My wife doesn't love me because I saw her and thought, ooh, yeah, she's good looking. I'm going to pursue her. No, that's not how it works. And although God is the one who initiated relationship with me, God is the one who turned me to him, he is the one who did all this, it's because of his grace that I am saved. I believe that there needs to be a much bigger emphasis on covenant relationship. My relationship with God is like a marriage. It's the fact that every day I am wanting to serve God because he loves me and I love him. It's this romantic love story of the fact that there's this want and this need to be able to serve God. And it's not because, I don't do good things just because, he saved me from hell. And I'm not saying that that's what this documentary is necessarily saying. It's that there's not enough emphasis on this covenantal relationship, on this relationship of this mutual love story of God loved me first, and now I love God so much, and I'm going to do everything possible to please him, and I enjoy God. I enjoy God because he's given me grace.
You actually see him as your father, and you are his child, and that's your core family, right? That you're part of this. This is who you are. You're a family member. You're a family member, and you your heart's desire is wired to just bask in the blessing of being in the family, and then just to learn to be in that family and to act according to the blessings that are there for us.
This past week, this is going to tie into the last clip that I have, and this last clip is from Flowers. It's Dr. Flowers, and
so this is a criticism against.
This is a criticism,
movie, right?
and
From
this is a
Arminian.
Yeah, he's an ex-Calvinist, become Arminian. He reviewed Calvin.
Maybe he'll do a movie called Ex-Calvinist.
Maybe, so I've already kind of given my criticism of his review, but this is something that really caught my attention in the very beginning. This last week, I found out that someone that I know personally who's been to Beit Hillel before, the congregation I go to, somebody I've worshiped with, has denied the Messiah and is very, very agitated and fervent in trying to turn people away from Yeshua and saying that Yeshua is a false Messiah, a false prophet, and that he's cursed and anyone who follows him is cursed and all these things. It was a sad thing not only to see him fall away, but to see him now attempt to bring other people down with him. And that made me think when Dr. Flowers says this comment, the first thing I thought of was, man, if you think that, well, listen to it first.
He's giving this didactic teaching. The reason you're not believing is because you have closed your eyes.
I apologize. I should also said he's talking about Acts 28:23 and following, when Paul is now trying to...
The very end of Acts, yeah.
Yeah, the very end of Acts, okay? So that's what he's talking about. This is what he's referencing here.
He's giving this didactic teaching. The reason you're not believing is because you have closed your eyes. Your heart has grown calloused. Otherwise, you might see, hear, turn, and understand and believe. Therefore, I want you to know that God's salvation has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will listen. What's the difference between Jew and Gentile? They're both sinful. They're both corrupt, just like the child and the old man. They're both corrupt. They're both sinful, okay? We're not debating that. The difference between the two is one is hardened and calloused, and the other one is not. That's the distinction between the two. And when you start off with the heart already hardened, and the stone breaks away only with effectual regeneration of this irresistible grace, then you have the premise of Calvinism, and the premise is wrong. The entire theological system of Calvinism is built upon the T, total inability.
The way that I took this, and maybe I took it wrong, but the way that I took this is that he's saying the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles is that the Jews had their heart, that they're not calloused.
The Gentiles are not Catholic.
The Gentiles...
Right? Yeah. I think that's what he's saying.
Is that what he's saying? Okay, maybe I misunderstood him.
That the Gentiles are not calloused and the Jews are. I think that's how he's... Unless I misunderstood what he's trying to say.
Okay, maybe I took it wrong.
So how did you hear it?
I heard it the other way around, that he was saying that the Jews were not callous, but the Christians were. Or that the Gentiles were. But I think now that you say that, I think you're right.
Yeah, because at the end of Acts, it says that Jews came day by day to see Paul when he was in prison, right? And he would teach them both from the Torah of Moses and from the prophets, morning until evening, because they wanted to come and hear. Jews wanted to come hear it from Paul. And then it said, some were being persuaded, others would not believe. So when Paul's word among these Jews in Rome who were coming to visit him, some of them believed, some of them rejected. And then he quotes Isaiah.
Yeah.
To those who are not, those that you don't believe. This is, Isaiah, this is just according to plan. Yeshua actually quotes this same passage from Isaiah 6 when he's talking about the sower goes out to sow, not every place the seed goes will produce fruit. Only the stuff that's in the good ground will preserve.
I think I misheard him. But to be honest with you, I think his review fell short because honestly, the biggest criticism that he has is about the way that the film made Arminian theology look. That's his biggest criticism. Which, I mean,
well, he says the core premise of Calvinism is the T, total depravity, total inability.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the dead person. And
Yeah,
someone, I don't remember who it was. I thought it was really
Mangus.
nicely put in our.
Oh,
in
yeah,
our,
yeah.
it was Terry. Terry
Terry,
in our
yeah.
soundboard today, or sound, or what do you call it?
Chat
What do you call
room.
it? Chat
Chat
room.
room.
Thank you. Dead people can't do anything. Just ask one.
Yeah.
You know, when Paul says you were dead, we were dead in our trespasses and sins. Not one chooses God.
Yep.
Not one. Okay. That's all, whatever you want to call it. Reformed, if you want to call it Calvinism, whatever you, that is what Paul would be saying is you're totally, that's total depravity.
You're a sinner.
You have inability. And I liked this, Paul Washer did make this good point in the movie. He talks about Genesis 37, where it says, and they hated him. And that is Joseph's brothers hated him, and they were not able to speak a good word about him because their hatred, they were not able to speak. Does it mean that and he makes this comment, did they not speak Hebrew, or did they not speak ancient Semitic language? No, they spoke the language. They had the words. They were unable to speak anything good because hatred was at the core. And that's the greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Greatest commandment is to love. And the Calvinism is going to say that a person can't just hear that and just obey it on their own will. God has to put his spirit of his son into your hearts whereby you cry, Abba, Father. That's what Galatians says. That's what Romans says, that it's the living, eternal, resurrected Son of God has it's his life in us, right? That's the life that is obedient. If we don't have that life, you could have the most beautiful religion in this world with the beautiful cathedrals or the beautiful synagogues and the beautiful stained glass windows and the most beautiful melodies and chanting. But
it's not going to matter
if you don't have the living Messiah in you, that's all going to be gone.
Okay, well, once again, I know that we've now taken about an hour to give our criticism of the movie Calvinist. However, once again, I can't I can't say enough good things about the film either.
Yeah.
I think that it is well worth watching. I think people, whether you agree with Calvin theology or not, that's beyond the point. I think this is a very good film to watch. I recommend it. I recommend buying it so you can show it to other people and so that you can watch it several times if you want. It is very good. Okay, next week we have the week off. And why do we have the week off? We will be sitting in lectures in Providence, Rhode Island for the Evangelical Theological Society, and then we will go to Boston to be at the Society of Biblical Literature. Please pray for us if you remember to. We greatly appreciate any prayers that we get from our listeners. And
travel mercies, God's wisdom, step by step.
And just the conversations that we have. Some of the world's leading scholars will be there, and it'll be just it's always a blessing, but just the Lord would guide the conversations and the meetups that we have with people. We're very excited for it.
Are we back then for the 22nd? Are we going to try to do a show on the day before Thanksgiving?
This is a great question. I think that we probably will try to do a show on Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving. And what we'll do is we'll do a recap of the ETS SBL. It might be a short show, and that's fine. I'll try to send out show notes. There probably won't be anything in the show notes except for a reminder that we'll have a show. And we'll try to do something that day. So yeah. Besides that, I hope that this has been a good review for people of the movie Calvinist. And we're happy that we were able to give it, and grateful that we were able to see the movie as well. And we look forward to a great time in Providence and Boston. And we covet your prayers. And we hope that if you watch this movie, that you will be as blessed as we were to see it, and that you'll learn something from it. But ultimately, just like the clip that we played on worship, the ultimate goal is to do one thing. And that one thing is to glorify our great God and our great Savior, Yeshua, the Messiah.